Welcome back to the Takeout, coming to you from New York City. Washington Democratic Congressman and Ranking Member of the House Armed Services Committee, Adam Smith, joins me now. Congressman, always good to see you. I want to tell you about something that you might not be aware of, but I want to get your reaction to. We have confirmed through U.S. officials that Kid Rock flew to Fort Belvoir this morning on his private jet and took a ride on 2 Apache helicopters with Secretary of Defense Pete Hegseth. How does that strike you?
Yeah, there's a lot more important things that I'm paying attention to. It seems a little trivial in the middle of the war that we're having with Iran and the fact that we're kind of stuck in that war. But I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about that. I don't care one way or the other what Pete Hegseth does with Kid Rock. I care what he's doing with the war in Iran and with the Department of Defense.
And what would you say the Department of Defense is or is not doing properly in the war with Iran?
Well, I think it was a mistake to get into the war in the first place, and I think they vastly overestimated what tactical military success could really do to change the strategic dynamic. They overestimated the ability of our, military to change the regime's outlook. Yes, we can blow up a lot of targets. We can reduce their military capability, but we could not eliminate it. And we found ourselves in a worse position, as you outlined with your previous guest. Now we're just fighting to get back to status quo, to opening up the Strait of Hormuz. So I think our military should do a better job of explaining, look, yes, you asked me, can I blow this up? Sure. But is that going to change the regime's calculation? Is that going to limit their nuclear program, their ballistic missile program, their support for terrorism? No. So now we're in a stuck position trying to figure out how to get Iran to come our way, and they don't seem inclined to do so.
According to the Center for Strategic and International Studies, 45% of precision strike missiles have been used in this conflict. 50% of terminal high-altitude area defense interceptors, THAAD, have been used, and almost 50% of Patriot missile interceptors have been used. And according to Center for Strategic International Studies, it will take up to 4 years to restock those. How big a problem is that?
Yeah, it's a significant problem, and it points up the real problem with this war. The cost is high. You mentioned the munitions. We've also had a large number of pieces of our equipment that have been destroyed. We lost 2 C-130s. We've had a number of strikes on our military bases in the region that have taken out radars. So the financial cost is high. Of course, we've also lost the lives of 13 service members and hundreds more wounded. And then economically, the Middle East obviously is devastated, but so is much of the world because the oil has been shut down, fertilizer, helium, other critical commodities. It really upset the global economy. So we see an enormous cost. And what is the benefit? We are no closer to stopping Iran's nuclear program now than we were when this started. And Iran's regime has become more hardlined and more emboldened. So yes, the cost of this conflict has been very high, and we have not realized much in the way of an important benefit from it.
From your vantage point, do you believe this ceasefire is reflective of internal but unstated concerns about munition supplies going forward, and if there is another conflict somewhere that has to be addressed?
Yeah, that's absolutely part of it. I think the other part of it is what I was alluding to, is that the strikes that we were doing weren't seeming to have the effect in terms of weakening the Iranian regime that we had hoped. I think those were two of the biggest factors.
So the Secretary of Defense, Pete Hegseth, is due before your committee later this week. What do you most want to know from him?
What's his plan for the war? Because the other piece of this is the president keeps threatening massive escalation. Hard to know how serious that is. The president has consistently said things throughout this conflict that are completely untrue. So we're not sure. But we have massed a lot of our service members in that region, ships, planes, Marines. What do we plan to do with them? And crucially, how do we think that could affect the outcome? As I said, if we send in ground troops to take Karg Island or try to seize the nuclear material, or if we ramp back up the bombing campaign, what effect do we think that's going to happen? Number one biggest question. Second, all the people he's fired at the Pentagon, most recently the Secretary of the Navy, the Joint Chiefs Army chair, the head of the Army, the Army Futures Command. They changed the name to a more complicated thing. General High. All of these firings, how are they impacting our ability to really be ready for the war, but also do the transformation in the military that we all want to see? So what's going on with that? Those are two of the biggest questions. I guess the third one is you're asking for $1.6 trillion, you, Secretary Hegseth. That's a 60% increase in the defense budget. Is that realistic? And what do you plan to do with the money?
Do you have any sense of what they plan to do with the money, that $1.6 trillion, which has been described in briefings to reporters as a transformational investment?
Yeah, well, it's a lot more money. I don't know if you want to call it a transformational investment, but in a situation where we have a $40 trillion debt, the president insists on cutting absolutely everybody's taxes so we have less revenue to deal with. A 1.6, and the 1.6 I get from counting the supplemental. They're talking about asking for $100 or $200 billion for a supplemental for this war. No, I think that the focus is going to try to be on drones, counter-drone technology, ballistic missile defense, and all of that. But there's also $22 billion battleship that the president is planning on building that doesn't seem to make any sense for the modern battlefield. So I question severely whether or not the Pentagon, which has not yet passed an audit, can effectively spend that much money. So, yeah, we need a lot more details on where the money is going.
Let me get your thoughts on the DHS standoff over funding. The White House said again today it needs to be resolved, and the attack at the White House Correspondents' Dinner Saturday underscores the necessity of paying everyone in DHS. And it has been observed by those who are not necessarily Republicans or Democrats, but are process-oriented, that this standoff has taken things out of the appropriations process, put it on a track where a reconciliation can now in the future resolve these things, and appropriators have essentially lost the essential role of Congress over the purse. How do you evaluate that?
Well, first of all, we, a long time ago in the House, should have passed what the Senate passed. The Senate passed a bill that would have fully funded everything in DHS except for ICE and the Border Patrol. Not an ideal outcome, because you'd like to resolve the whole thing, but we would have funded what we agree upon. There is still considerable disagreement on how to better regulate what ICE and the Border Patrol are doing along the lines of immigration enforcement, and with legitimate concerns. We saw the 2 people killed in Minneapolis. We've seen all of the excessive use of force and the violation of people's rights. Those issues should be addressed. But we have a bill that the Senate passed unanimously in a bipartisan way, that the House has had the opportunity to pass for over a month now, that would fund everything else. It would really be helpful. We should do that. And then the larger issue, yeah, I agree. We should not be going to reconciliation to fund ICE. I will also point out that we already did reconciliation last year, which added $190 billion to DHS, to ICE and the Border Patrol. They shouldn't need another chunk of money from a reconciliation process. The entire DHS budget is around $60 to $65 billion a year. So the supplemental from last year was 3 times that. They should have plenty of money to deal with those problems.
Congressman Adam Smith, Democrat from Washington, ranking member of the Armed Services Committee. Appreciate the time, sir. As always, thank you.
Thanks, Major.